My name is Emma. I'm 30 years old and I work as a financial advisor. That's where I met David, my now ex-husband. I remember the day we met like it was yesterday. He walked into my office carrying a stack of papers and wearing a troubled expression. Emma, right? He said, extending his hand. I'm David Caldwell. They say you're the best at sorting out financial messes. That's what they say, I replied with a smile. Let's see what we can do about yours. David was tall, with short brown hair and eyes that seemed to smile even when he wasn't. As I combed through his documents, our conversation moved beyond numbers and taxes. We talked about our favorite movies, debated the best music, and even argued over which pizza place in town was superior. There was something about the way he talked, easygoing and warm, that made hours feel like minutes. You know, I never thought sorting out my finances could actually be fun, David confessed as we finished up. I must have the magic touch, I joked. He laughed. Would you be interested in grabbing a coffee sometime? It's the least I can do for making this less painful than I expected. That coffee turned into dinner, and dinners evolved into weekend getaways. Before I knew it, we were inseparable. 6 months later, David proposed, and without a second thought, I said yes. It was a whirlwind romance, but everything about it felt right. Our wedding was simple but beautiful, and as we exchanged vows, I truly believed I had found my forever. David's mother, Barbara, was there, of course, stern-looking but seemingly happy for us. As she hugged me at the reception, she leaned in and whispered with a half-smile, "You'd better give me grandkids soon." At first, life as a married couple was bliss. David worked in real estate, and I continued at my firm. We shared cozy dinners, movie nights, and long walks. We were a team. Or so I thought. But things began to shift once the topic of children started creeping into conversations, first casually, then more frequently. It started with occasional remarks from Barbara, but before long, it became a constant refrain. She'd call and ask if I was pregnant yet, and during visits, she'd drop comments like, "A grandchild would really make this family complete." David always brushed it off with a laugh. "Mom, give us some time," he'd say, but the pressure was building. I tried to be patient, reminding myself that Barbara was just excited about becoming a grandmother. But as the demands grew louder and more frequent, I began to feel like our marriage wasn't enough without a child. "David, your mom needs to back off a bit," I said one evening, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. "It's like she's more involved in our marriage than we are." He looked uncomfortable. "She's just excited, Emma. Let's not make a big deal out of it." But it was becoming a big deal. Barbara's influence in our lives wasn't limited to her demands for grandchildren. She had opinions on everything, from how we managed our finances to what we ate. One Saturday morning, as David and I were enjoying breakfast, his phone rang. It was Barbara, and as usual, David put it on speaker. "David, dear, are you both eating healthy? Remember, a good diet is important for conceiving," she said in that authoritative tone of hers. David chuckled. "Yes, Mom, we're eating healthy. Don't worry." I forced a smile, but inside, the weight of her constant involvement was becoming harder to ignore. I was losing it. It felt like Barbara was monitoring our every move. Things escalated when she started visiting more frequently. One evening, she showed up unannounced, carrying a stack of parenting books. "Emma, you should start reading these. It's never too early to prepare," she said, plopping the books onto our coffee table. I glanced at David, hoping he'd speak up, but he just shrugged. "Thanks, Barbara. We'll look into them," I said, forcing a smile, trying to sound grateful. Her visits soon became a regular thing. It was as if she was keeping tabs on us, making sure we were doing everything right to have a baby. And every time she brought it up, David would just nod along, agreeing with whatever she said. One night, after another one of her visits, I couldn't take it anymore. "David, we need to talk," I said, the frustration spilling out of me. "What's up?" he asked, barely glancing up from the TV. "Your mom, she's suffocating us with this baby talk. We barely have time to be a couple without her interference," I said, trying to keep calm. David finally looked at me. "She's just excited, Emma. She means well." "Excited or obsessed?" I shot back. "It feels like she's the third person in our marriage." David sighed. "She's my mom. What do you expect me to do? Tell her to stop caring?" "It's not about caring, David. It's about respecting our space, our decisions. Can't you see that?" He didn't respond. Instead, he turned back to the TV. And that was the end of the conversation. But it wasn't the end of the issue. If anything, it only got worse. Barbara's visits became more frequent, and her comments even more intrusive. You two should take a vacation, just relax. It'll help with conception, she suggested one day. Another time, she said, maybe Emma should quit her job to reduce stress. It felt like she was dictating our life, and David was just letting it happen. I started to feel like a stranger in my own marriage. The love and understanding that once connected David and me was slipping away, overshadowed by Barbara's constant presence. The pressure about having a baby was wearing us both down. We were arguing more often, and the romance that had once filled our home seemed to vanish. Still, despite everything, I clung to the hope that things would get better, that we'd somehow find our way back to each other. But then came the day that changed everything. David came home late one evening, looking more downcast than I'd ever seen him. I was in the kitchen trying to fix us a quick dinner when I noticed David slumped into a chair at the table, his face buried in his hands. "David, is everything okay?" I asked, concerned. He let out a heavy sigh, his voice low and serious. "We need to talk, Emma." The tone sent a chill down my spine. I sat down across from him, my heart pounding. "It's about us, trying to have a baby," he said, still avoiding my gaze. A knot formed in my stomach. "What about it?" I asked, my voice barely steady. David glanced up at me, his eyes clouded with something I couldn't quite place. "Remember when we went to the doctor? For those tests?" I nodded, recalling the fertility checkup we had done a few weeks ago, hoping it would quiet Barbara's nagging once and for all. David took a deep breath. "The results came in today. It's not you, Emma. It's me." Relief, confusion, and sadness swirled inside me. "What do you mean?" I asked, my throat tightening. "The doctor said I have a low sperm count. It's unlikely I can father a child," he said, his voice breaking. I reached across the table for his hand, trying to comfort him. "David, it's okay. We'll figure this out together. Maybe there's treatment or other options." But he pulled his hand away, shaking his head. "No, you don't understand. I won't go through any treatment. It's just not something I can do." I was stunned. "But why? If there's a chance, why not try?" "It's my decision, Emma," he said firmly, standing up, still avoiding my eyes. "I just can't." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The man I loved, strong, confident, was giving up without even trying. "David, please don't let this come between us. We can work through it," I pleaded. But he was already walking out of the kitchen. "I need some time alone to think about all this," he muttered before leaving me sitting there, numb. I sat in silence, trying to process it all. Why wouldn't he even consider treatment? Was his pride more important than our chance to have a family? The next few days were tense, like walking on eggshells. David barely spoke to me, and when he did, his words were cold and distant. I could feel the growing chasm between us, a crack in the foundation of our marriage that seemed to widen with each passing day. Then came the day that shattered everything. David had been out late again. I lay in bed, pretending to be asleep when David came in. He must have thought I was already out cold because I heard him start a quiet conversation on the phone. "Yeah, Mom, I got the results. It's not good," he said, his voice heavy. "No, I don't want treatment. I know, but I can't." "Yes, I'll figure something out." Hearing him talk to his mother about something so personal, something he had barely discussed with me, felt like a stab in the heart. The fact that he was confiding in Barbara about our struggles, keeping me in the dark, felt like a betrayal. It was becoming clear that Barbara's influence over him was far greater than I'd ever realized. As I lay there in the dark, tears silently streamed down my face. I had never felt so alone. Our marriage was unraveling right before my eyes, and I didn't know how to stop it. Life at home had become unbearable. David and I were like strangers living under the same roof, barely speaking, moving through our routines in silence. The love and warmth that had once defined our relationship seemed like a distant memory, lost in the cold reality of our situation. But just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, life threw me an unexpected curveball. I had been feeling off for a few days, at first thinking it was just stress. But when I missed my period, a sinking feeling crept in. A part of me was too scared to even consider the possibility, but I knew I had to find out. One morning, I bought a pregnancy test, my heart pounding as I sat in the bathroom waiting for the result. Those few minutes felt like hours. And then, there it was, the little positive sign. I was pregnant. For a moment, I couldn't believe it. After everything we had been through, after all the talk about David's infertility, this felt like a miracle, a glimmer of hope amidst the wreckage of our marriage. But a wave of anxiety soon followed. How would David react? I decided to tell him that evening. He came home late as he usually did, barely acknowledging me. I took a deep breath and approached him, my hands trembling. "David, we need to talk," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked up, weary and distant. "What is it now, Emma?" I swallowed hard. "I'm pregnant." "I'm pregnant," I blurted out. For a moment, there was silence, and then David laughed, a bitter, cynical laugh. "Pregnant? How?" "According to the doctors, I can't," he said, his voice dripping with disbelief. "I don't know, but the test is positive. We're going to have a baby," I replied, tears starting to well up in my eyes. David stood up abruptly, anger flashing across his face. "This is some kind of joke, right? You're trying to trap me." I stared at him, shocked. "Trap you?" "David, I'm telling you the truth. We're going to have a baby, our baby." He began pacing the room, running his hands through his hair. "No, this can't be. You must have cheated. That's it, isn't it? You cheated on me." It felt like a slap. "Cheated? How can you even say that? I've been nothing but faithful to you," I said, my voice breaking. But he wasn't listening. He was consumed by his own rage and disbelief. "Get out. I want you out of this house," he yelled, his words like a punch to the gut. "David, please," I pleaded, my voice trembling. "Let's talk about this. We can go to the doctor, get a confirmation. There has to be a mistake." But it was like talking to a wall. He stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. That night, I found myself sleeping in the guest room, my mind spinning with confusion and heartache. The next morning, David was gone before I woke up. Instead, his mother, Barbara, showed up at the house. The look on her face was a mix of anger and disgust. "You should be ashamed of yourself, Emma," she spat, "trapping my son with another man's child." I stood there, stunned. "I didn't cheat on David. This child is his," I said, my voice shaking. Barbara let out a cold, mocking laugh. "Do you take me for a fool? My son can't have children. You're just a gold digger, trying to secure your future." I was stunned by her cruelty. "This is David's child. I've never been with anyone else," I insisted, my voice wavering. She stepped closer, her voice venomous. "You have 1 week to pack your things and leave. And don't even think about asking for alimony or child support. You won't get a dime from us." Barbara's ultimatum was the final straw. I knew then that I couldn't continue living in a house filled with resentment and baseless accusations. It was time to take control of my life for my sake and for the baby's. First things first. Filing for divorce wasn't an easy decision, but it was necessary. David and his mother tried to make the process difficult, demanding a share of everything I owned, claiming it was their right. But I had a strong case. Everything, my savings, my property, had been mine long before David entered my life. Their attempts to grab what wasn't theirs fell apart quickly. As for alimony, I didn't ask for a penny. I wanted no financial ties to David, no reason for him or his mother to have any influence over my life again. I was determined to start fresh, free from their toxicity. I found a modest apartment. It wasn't extravagant, but it was cozy, a perfect place for a new beginning. Packing up my things from the house was bittersweet. Every photo, every piece of furniture held a memory, but I was ready to leave it all behind. On the day I moved out, David was conspicuously absent. Maybe he could have faced me, or maybe he just didn't care. Either way, it didn't matter. I left the keys on the counter and closed that chapter of my life. The first few nights in my new apartment were the hardest. The silence was overwhelming, and the reality of everything often brought me to tears. But I found solace in the little life growing inside me. Talking to my unborn child became a nightly ritual, filling the emptiness with hope and love. Slowly, life in my new apartment began to feel less like a refuge and more like a home. I settled into a routine, and the bond with my unborn child grew stronger with each passing day. One afternoon, as I sorted through some old belongings, I stumbled upon a photo of David and me from happier times. A pang of sadness washed over me, but it quickly gave way to relief. That chapter of my life was over. Then my phone rang. It was David. "Emma, I've received the divorce papers," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. "I'm glad the papers reached you. Please handle the formalities," I responded calmly. There was a long pause before he added, "I won't bother you about the baby. You won't hear from me again." His words were cold, but they brought closure. As I hung up the phone, I realized that in my solitude, I had discovered a strength I never knew I possessed. I was ready to face the future, not as David's estranged wife, but as a strong, independent woman and a loving mother. It was a quiet evening. I sat on the couch, absent-mindedly flipping through a magazine while Jacob, my 4-year-old son, played contentedly with his toys on the floor. The piece was abruptly interrupted by a knock at the door. Puzzled, I got up, wondering who it could be at this hour. When I opened the door, a woman I barely recognized stood there, her eyes filled with a familiar sorrow. "Hi, Emma. It's been a long time," she said hesitantly. It took me a moment, but then I realized who she was. Linda, an old friend I had known through David. "Linda, yes, it has been a while. What brings you here?" I asked, curious. She shifted uncomfortably, glancing past me at Jacob, who was now peeking around my legs. "I thought you should know about David," she said quietly. Just hearing his name after all these years sent a shiver down my spine. "What about him?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Linda sighed. "He's not doing well, Emma. After you left, things went downhill for him. He became an alcoholic. He remarried a few years ago and had a child, but the boy was born with disabilities. David, he couldn't handle it. He left them, divorced his wife, and now he's refusing to pay child support. He's in legal trouble." The news hit me hard, but not in the way Linda might have expected. I felt a deep sadness, not for David, but for his child and the woman he had abandoned. "That's terrible," I murmured, feeling a sense of sorrow for the innocent lives affected by his choices. "I see," I said softly, and Linda nodded. "I thought you should know, given your past with him." I appreciated her concern but knew it was time to set boundaries. "Thank you for telling me, Linda, but that part of my life is over. David made his choices, and they have nothing to do with me or my son." Linda glanced at Jacob, then back at me. "I understand, Emma. I just thought." I smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. "I appreciate it, Linda, but my focus is on Jacob and our life now. What David does or doesn't do isn't my concern anymore." She nodded, seeming to understand. "I hope you and Jacob are happy, Emma. You both deserve it." "Thank you. We are," I said, glancing at Jacob, who was back to playing with his toys. "And I intend to keep it that way." After Linda left, I closed the door and leaned against it, taking a moment to steady myself. The past had a way of creeping back in, but I wasn't going to let it overshadow the life I had built for me and my son. The park was full of life that day, with the sounds of children laughing and playing. I stood nearby, watching Jacob run around, my heart swelling with pride. But then a familiar, unwelcome voice cut through the air. "Emma, is that you?" I turned, my heart sinking as I saw Barbara, my former mother-in-law, approaching. Her eyes were fixed on Jacob. "Barbara," I said coolly, "what are you doing here?" Ignoring my tone, her gaze remained locked on Jacob. "He's grown so much. That's your son, right?" "Yes, this is Jacob," I answered, stepping slightly in front of him, a protective instinct rising in me. Barbara's eyes sparkled with a disturbing eagerness. "I was hoping to see him. After all, he's my grandson." A wave of anger surged through me. "And why would you want to see him now?" Her face twisted with a mix of frustration and something darker. "Well, you know, my other grandson, he's not well. He's sick. It's just not the same. I want to be part of a healthy grandchild's life." Her words hit me like a slap. The contempt in her voice for her own grandson, just because he wasn't perfect, was revolting. "Barbara," I said, my voice cold and steady, "Jacob is not a replacement for your other grandchild. You don't get to pick and choose when you want to be part of his life." She blinked, taken aback by my response. "But, no," I cut her off. "You and David made your choices. You've never been a part of Jacob's life, and that's not going to change now. Please leave." Barbara stared at me, her expression hardening, but I didn't back down. Finally, with a huff, she turned and walked away, her pride wounded. As she disappeared from sight, I took a deep breath, calming the storm of emotions inside me. I turned back to Jacob, watching him play, and felt a sense of peace return. This was my life now, and I wasn't going to let anyone, least of all Barbara, disrupt it. "You have no right to be part of Jacob's life," I said, my voice steely. "Not after everything that happened." "But Emma, that was all David's doing," Barbara protested. I shook my head. "You supported him. You turned against me when I was carrying your grandchild, and now you speak with disgust about your other grandson just because he's sick. That's unforgivable." Barbara's face reddened. "You can't keep me away from my grandson." "I can, and I will," I declared firmly. "Jacob doesn't need someone in his life who values people based on their health. He will not be a part of your twisted view of family." She looked like she was about to argue, but I cut her off. This conversation is over. Stay away from us, Barbara. Your presence is neither wanted nor welcomed. I took Jacob's hand and walked away, leaving Barbara standing alone, her face a mix of anger and disbelief. As we walked, Jacob looked up at me, his innocent eyes filled with curiosity. Mommy, who was that lady? That was someone we used to know, sweetheart, I replied gently, but she's not part of our lives anymore. Later, as I sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky with warm colors, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. Jacob was inside, his laughter echoing through the house as he played. Life had settled into a calm rhythm, the storms of the past now distant memories. Mom, look what I made. Jacob's voice pulled me from my thoughts. He came running out, holding a drawing in his hands. It was a picture of the two of us, smiling under a big bright sun. It's beautiful, Jacob, I said, pulling him into a hug. You're quite the artist. He beamed with pride. I want to put it on the fridge. Let's do that, I smiled, following him inside. As we walked, I thought about how far we had come. There was a time when the weight of the past felt crushing, but now it seemed like a distant echo. Later that evening, after Jacob was asleep, I sat down with a cup of tea, reflecting on everything. The phone rang, disrupting the quiet. I hesitated but decided to answer. Hello. It was my sister, Anna. Hey, Emma. I just wanted to check in. How are you and Jacob doing? We're doing well, Anna. Jacob's growing up so fast, I replied, a smile in my voice. I heard about your run-in with Barbara. Are you okay? She asked, concern lacing her words. I sighed. Yeah, it was unexpected, but I'm okay. It's just a reminder of the past. I know it's tough, but you've come so far, Emma. You're strong, and you've built a wonderful life for you and Jacob, she said, her words encouraging and warm. Thanks, Anna. It means a lot. We talked for a while longer about small things, everyday life. It was comforting, this connection with my sister, a reminder of the support system I had. After hanging up, I walked to the living room where Jacob's drawing was proudly displayed on the fridge. Looking at it, I realized how much we had both grown. The pain and anger of the past have faded, leaving room for healing and new beginnings. I went to Jacob's room and watched him sleep peacefully. Leaning down, I kissed his forehead gently. Good night, my little artist, I whispered. Back on the porch, I gazed up at the stars emerging in the night sky. The echoes of the past were fading, their hold on me loosening. In their place were hope, quiet strength, and the unconditional love between a mother and her son.